the Al Wafra oil fields in Kuwait about 24 hours ago. Overnight, the scream of fighter bombers was heard over the entire eastern province here, all aircraft heading north on bombing missions. We're waiting for pool reports to come back, and frankly, we're a little bit stymied as to why it's taking so long. But the impression that we're getting here is that there is some fighting going on now with an anticipation of a lot more to come.
Greg Jarrett in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, thank you very much. Of course, Greg's reports can be heard every morning on KGO Radio and here on Channel 7 at 5, 6, and 11. About 200 miles north of where Greg is reporting is the Saudi coastal town of Khafji, the site of the first major ground battle. Saudi-led troops retook the abandoned town today after 2 nights and 2 days of fierce battles.
There were lots of surrenders. I think every time that we have more than 400 prisoners of war.
Along with the captured, military sources say at least 200 Iraqis were killed or wounded. Everywhere there are signs of battle, a burned-out Iraqi armored personnel carrier and the stains of war on the dusty streets. Now the Allied armored carriers are waiting along the road to enter the town, but there's cleaning up to do. Military officers say there is still sporadic fighting, and they have to be flushed out, sometimes one building at a time.
An unnamed Army soldier has lost his lawsuit against the federal government. And with today's ruling, all soldiers in Operation Desert Storm have lost their right to refuse to take experimental drugs. Today's ruling means that in the event of nerve gas or germ warfare in the Gulf, soldiers may be given antidotes that have not been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Soldiers are not entitled to a warning and cannot refuse to take the drugs. The judge said he would not challenge the government's right to make strategic military decisions. The advocacy group called Public Citizen will appeal.
Here on the home front, Arab Americans are growing more and more concerned that they are being targeted, the subject of racial attacks from airports to schoolyards. Leslie Brinkley takes us to a meeting tonight in San Francisco where discrimination was on everyone's mind.
We've got to put an end to that. We have got to stop it.
Tonight, discrimination against Arab Americans dominated much of the discussion at this anti-war meeting at San Francisco's Third Baptist Church. Many likened the World War II Japanese internment camps to this year's random FBI interrogations of Arab Americans for information about potential terrorism.
If you're doing it as a fishing expedition to look into my personal and political beliefs and opinions as an American, then I am not going to cooperate.
Also of concern to Arab American parents is teaching children racism through what they say is a proliferation of war games on playgrounds now in which Arabs are labeled the bad guys.
Some Palestinians in the high schools are being, are feeling embarrassed of saying that they are Arab Americans. Some saying that we are Italians, some saying that we are, Spanish or whatever. It's basically guilt by association. You know, if I have a dark mustache and I have dark features, doesn't mean that I'm bent on violence and destruction.
In fact, since the war began, violence has been directed against Arab Americans. Last week in San Francisco, store and deli windows were smashed, and on Monday, an Arab American family returning home claimed they were harassed by San Francisco airport police just because they spoke Arabic. Today in San Jose, protesters picketed Pan Am offices for refusing to carry Iraqi nationals on flights. Some say they plan to meet with airline officials. Others are launching community education programs to combat what they're calling war hysteria. Leslie Brinkley, Channel 7 News Tonight.
KGO Medical Watch with special environmental reports and traffic reports live from the sky. Tomorrow morning on KGO 810.
This company basketball game is a great idea. Yeah. It'll build togetherness, friendship, team spirit. So let's have some fun. Oh. You're all over me. Tell me, please, throw the ball, please. Stop. If you follow me again, you're going to be looking for the ball.
There are a lot of ways to improve business morale. The best, the on-time delivery of Federal Express.
Mr. Triola? What? Your package from Tokyo. Have a good one.
Thank you. Federal Express. Absolutely, positively the best in the business.
Now, Circuit City's cut prices to the bare bones. It's the Price Slasher sale, packed with big values on top-brand audio, video, appliances, and more. Like this Gold Star compact microwave oven with easy touch controls, now only $88. And this 19-inch stereo TV with remote, yours now for just $218. Hurry in for prices cut to the bare bones. It's the Price Slasher sale now at Circuit City.
Welcome to Circuit City, where service is state-of-the-art.
Your Ford dealers just received a special shipment of cars factory price to save you thousands. Hundreds of Mustangs have just arrived with air, stereo cassette, and more at no extra charge. A special allocation of loaded Tauruses, 1,000 less than before. A huge selection of Thunderbirds equipped with cassette stereo, speed control, and more at no extra charge. These aren't rebates, they're actual reductions in the sticker prices of each vehicle. Plus, you could save hundreds more with factory-to-dealer incentives. But hurry, this ends soon. See your Ford dealer today.
Don't get divorced no matter how miserable you are. Next, Donnie.
We'll have the latest on the fighting along the Saudi-Kuwaiti border. An American woman becomes the first female MIA of the war. And a freed British journalist on the nightmare of Iraqi interrogation and his harrowing ride to freedom.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington with the latest on the Gulf War, Ted Koppel.
Friday morning now in the Gulf, Pentagon sources tell ABC's Bob Zelnick that there has in fact been some massing of Iraqi forces along the border between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, but not in the numbers that some sources were suggesting earlier. Somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 Iraqi troops is the current estimate. There is no present expectation that a force of this size could be used to launch a major ground assault, but they may very well be used to probe Arab and U.S. coalition positions near the border. The Iraqi army does not have access to aerial reconnaissance, and there are only unconfirmed reports that the Soviets may be supplying Baghdad with some limited satellite photography. The only reliable intelligence the Iraqis can count on these days is on the ground, and that they can only get at the cost of engaging coalition forces. Here's a wrap-up on the latest ground action from Nightline correspondent Forrest Sawyer in Saudi Arabia.
Tonight was a cleanup operation in Khafji. Saudi sources moving through the city, making sure the Iraqi troops had been rounded up. ABC correspondent Morton Dean was there.
There's no question there had been a major military event in Khafji. You could see it and you could smell it. Several Iraqi armored personnel carriers were still burning long after the battle had ended. While the Allies do control the town, there is sniper fire there tonight, indicating, of course, that there's still some more mopping up work yet to be done.
Throughout the day, it was a tug of war. The Iraqis holding on to Khafji for more than 36 hours. Saudi and Qatari troops struggling to regain their ground.
A little bit frustrating right now. It's kind of a seesaw thing. But I don't have any doubt what's going to happen eventually.
U.S. Marine Harrier pilots were in the skies, hitting Iraqi convoys moving in as reinforcements.
Aircraft are swarming over that battlefield like gnats. And like I said, I think my biggest danger up there today was running into another American aircraft delivering ordnance on target.
On the ground, Marines stayed in positions just south of the city.
Why were you firing? Just taking fire from those soldiers up there. We do have friendlies in that area. We're aware of that.
Holding their fire because U.S. reconnaissance teams were trapped inside. The teams eventually made their way out.
We were going in, we're following the Saudis' assault into the city. And when we got to the gates of the city, it's just like all hell broke loose. You know, there was tracers flying everywhere. And we abandoned our vehicle and got into a garage.
While Qatari troops fired on a water tower occupied by Iraqi artillery spotters, U.S. Marine Cobras provided additional firepower. U.S. officials were clearly embarrassed by the seizure of Khafji and the long battle to retake it.
We were not engaged, U.S. forces were not engaged in that action. Yes, sir.
Officials also made it clear there were no U.S. casualties in the retaking of Khafji. Saudi sources claim 12 of their troops were killed, along with 28 Iraqis. They say they seized 400 Iraqis as prisoners of war. Now, as for those Iraqi troops that are massed along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border, as you might expect throughout the night, they have been hit and hit hard from the air. B-52s laying down tons of bombs. Apache helicopters and A-10 attack planes called Warthogs by the troops here have been hitting the tanks and the armored vehicles it has been quite a sight. As a matter of fact, one pilot said, I don't know why Saddam is doing this with his troops, bringing them up out of their bunkers. Doesn't make much military sense to him, he says, but it's fine. He calls it just like a turkey shoot. Ted?
You know, Forrest, one almost has a sense at this point that U.S. military leaders in the region are fighting hard to sort of suppress the optimism, the sense that everything is going so well and likely to go even better in the days ahead, that they don't want to say it publicly for fear of raising public expectations.
Yes, you certainly hear that from the higher officials, but it's very interesting that on the ground, there was a lot of frustration about what was going on in Khafji. Now, that was a Saudi operation from beginning to end. It was Saudis who allowed those Iraqi troops to come into Khafji in the first place and take up defensible positions. It was Saudis that led the fighting that a lot of the troops felt wasn't particularly effective, not nearly as effective as they thought as U.S. troops would be. They were itching to get in there and show them how it was done.
Forrest Sawyer, thank you very much. With the war now into its third week, the news from the Persian Gulf is shifting increasingly from the air to the ground. And from the ground, one of the most unsettling reports to date, the first female soldier missing in action. Here's Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield with that story and with other news about the Gulf.
After the Allies took back the Saudi town of Khafji today, site of the first ground skirmish of the Gulf War, the American military scorned Iraq's claims that the battle represented some kind of victory for them.
They drove down the road to an empty town and said they took it. If they want to call that a military victory, they can go ahead.
But victory for the Allies had a price. All the 11 Marines killed in the fighting at Khafji were from Camp Pendleton in California, where families waited to find out who had died.
I don't believe it quite yet. He didn't have any facts, and they still haven't given me any facts. I don't really know what happened. And until I hear that, maybe it won't be real to me. It's not real to me quite yet.
And there was also some uncertainty about just how the Marines had died.
You know the rumors that have been circulating in this building all day that these were the result of friendly fire?
No, I didn't know that rumor. I don't believe that's correct. If that, in fact, is correct, it will come to light because everything does.
All or most of the Marines who were killed were in 2 light attack vehicles. These are the lightly armored Marine troop carriers that have been used instead of the Army's big, heavier Bradleys. Supposedly, they were hit by enemy fire. They took direct hits, but the Marines are, of course, investigating, and it's possible they'll find that it was friendly fire, either artillery or from close air support. And if that's true, it's one of those things that happens. It's not uncommon in war.
President Bush attended the annual National Prayer Breakfast today, then met with American Jewish leaders, one of whom gave this insight into the president's thinking about the war.
That he trusts that there will be more aerial work before there is a ground war. He is not anxious at this point to enter into a ground war.
In Israel, where an Iraqi Scud missile landed harmlessly between an Arab village and an Israeli settlement in the occupied territories, the government continued to impose a 22-hour-a-day curfew on Palestinians in the territories.
There's a growing concern that the longer they keep this curfew on, and it's been on for 2 weeks now, that people are going to become more and more restless. After all, they are not allowed to work. And when they don't work, they don't have any money. When they don't have any money, they don't have any food. And that, in turn, will create more tension and perhaps demonstrations and then even clashes with the Israeli army.
But perhaps the biggest, or at least the most unsettling news of the day, came with a late report during this morning's briefing.
We have an initial report, and I see initial is underlined, that 2 soldiers, 1 male and 1 female, are missing following a transportation mission today.
The 2 missing Americans were not involved in the battle for Khafji. They were working as part of a transport unit well south of the fighting. But this first possible loss of a service woman is sure to revive an old debate about where women belong in the military. It's not as though women haven't been at risk before. 16 women died under fire during World War II, and 67 nurses spent more than 3 years as prisoners of war in a Japanese camp in the Philippines. And 8 nurses, including First Lieutenant Sharon Lane, died during the Vietnam War.
Morale is still good.
But today, some 30,000 women are on duty in the Persian Gulf. And while federal laws and military regulations prohibit them from combat, their work in service support units takes them very close to the fighting.
women serve in service support units, but the simple fact is that service support units and furnishing support to combat units often find themselves up near the front.
Undoubtedly, the idea of women repairing airplanes, handling weapons, flying transport planes is hardly shocking in an age when so many barriers have fallen. But what about the impact of large numbers of women coming home in body bags or being taken as prisoners of war, as an unconfirmed Baghdad radio report claimed today? Can the home front deal with such possibilities? Antonia Chase served as Air Force Undersecretary in the Carter years.
I think their skills are needed, and it would be impossible and certainly unfortunate to withdraw them totally from the armed services now. But it will be tough, and it certainly crashes against many stereotypes and many people's ideology.
It's no longer at all surprising to see a woman on the federal bench or performing brain surgery or running a giant corporation or driving an 18-wheeler. But the idea of a woman falling in battle may well be the most primal of once unthinkable images. It now seems almost inevitable that we will be confronting precisely that reality in the weeks and months ahead. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
When we come back, we'll talk about that reality of women serving near the front lines of combat with retired Brigadier General Patricia Foote, who is herself a veteran of Vietnam. Then later, the first television interview of a British journalist who was arrested during the first days of the war and tortured at the hands of the Iraqi military. Those stories and more when we return.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Ford.
Ford Probe, for those who'd rather be driving.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
Last weekend at a special sneak preview, audiences fell in love with Once Around, the movie Gene Siskel calls the first really good film of 1991. A comic and dramatic delight. The most memorable movie family since Moonstruck, says sneak previews.
No! Yes!
This weekend, it's your turn to see Richard Dreyfuss, Holly Hunter, Danny Aiello, Laura San Giacomo, and Jenna Rollins. From the director of My Life as a Dog, Once Around, rated R. Now playing in select areas. Opens tomorrow at theaters everywhere.
Something big is happening at Levitt's, Friday through Monday. 4 big days to save big money. Everything is on sale at 20 to 68% off. Only $499.99 buys both contemporary sofa and matching love seat. And only $599.99 buys both sleeper sofa and matching love seat. Something big is happening at Levitt's, Friday through Monday night.
You'll love it at Levitt's.
It's a wall-to-wall sellout at Auto West Toyota.
If you told me yesterday I could buy this car at this price...
The dealing's not done till you deal with us.
I don't know how they do it, but I'm sure glad they do.
No one can save you bigger bucks. Two-wheel drive trucks, $49 down or $99 a month. Save $5,000 on a Toyota. 4x4s, $49 down or $179 a month. Get to Fremont Boulevard in Fremont now. Auto West Toyota, the Toyota warehouse. It's the time to buy.
Friday, a Barbara Walters exclusive. He was once our feared enemy. Times have changed, but has Muammar Gaddafi? Does he still support his friend Saddam? 2020, Friday.
During a career that lasted almost 3 decades, Brigadier General Patricia Foote witnessed tremendous changes in the role of women in the military. A Vietnam veteran, General Foote served in a variety of assignments, including 15 years with the Military Police Corps. She retired in 1989 as the commanding general of Fort Belvoir in Virginia. General Foote joins us now from our Washington bureau. I sometimes feel, General Foote, that perhaps men have a much harder time dealing with the reality of women not in combat but near combat than women do. Have you found the same thing?
I have found this consistently throughout my career, Mr. Koppel, that the fact of our presence in a battlefield or our presence in an area of operations is no big thing to a woman. but to a man it continues to be a new experience to deal with.
Why do you think that's so? Not why is it a new experience, but why is it a discomforting experience, do you think?
I think because men are not brought up to believe that women should, in fact, be in this particular type of environment. I think men are conditioned to feel that women are not that integral to the military. And in these days, we find with 11% of the Army right now, women, that it's rather difficult for the men to realize that the women are there, and they're there as an integral part of the force. And given the battlefields of today, should there be war, as we're having in the Mideast right now, that if there are men who will be victims, there will be women who will be victims also. We will have women who will become combat casualties.
You do understand, I'm sure, that most men, and I rather suspect a fair amount of women who are civilians, are more horrified at the notion of a woman being taken prisoner by the Iraqis than they are by the notion of a man being taken prisoner.
I can understand that because I don't believe they have been conditioned to think perhaps as we have thought, but as a professional soldier and one who served for 30 years, and thinking in terms of my friends female friends who also have been professionals. To us, it just became part of the turf of being a professional soldier, as it is for the man. If you accept the role of the woman or the man in the military, then you accept all the parts that go with it. That could be becoming a prisoner of war, that could be becoming someone who is injured in combat, or who could be killed.
Is the military doing a good enough job, do you think, of psychologically integrating the men and women? What I mean by that is the Israelis found some years ago that some of the male counterparts of the women in the military were inclined to take bigger risks to help a woman comrade than they would even have taken for a male comrade.
I can only say that in my experience, I have found that the men will accept me as a peer if I prove that I am competent to do the job that I'm there to do. And if I'm not, then they will not accept me as a member of the team.
I wasn't even thinking about suggesting any level of incompetence, quite the contrary, that there is almost an extra level of concern that the man on the front may have if he knows that a woman comrade is in trouble, and that, you know, years of sort of being taught to, you got to take care of your little sisters sort of mentality.
That could happen, but in my experience, and especially when I'm thinking in terms of Vietnam, the year I was there, I found that we were all interested in taking care of each other regardless of gender. That did not enter into the equation, but simply to make sure that we as fellow professionals were taking care of each other.
One last question, General Foote. Do you think the American public is conditioned to expect the casualties that you predict will inevitably happen if and when ground combat begins in earnest?
I would only hope that the American public looks at this issue of casualties in one particular perspective. A woman's life is no more precious than a man. We heard today that a man and a woman were perhaps missing in action. I care for him as much as I care for her, and the public should also. They should also realize that the women who have volunteered to join the service have accepted the same risks that the men have done in so doing.
General Foote, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koppel.
When we come back, we'll be joined by Bruce Chesman, a British journalist who was imprisoned by Iraqi soldiers shortly after the war began, accused of being an American pilot and brutally interrogated.
There goes my stomach again. But I've had it up to here with this antacid taste.
Then get great flavor up to here with the rich, fruity taste of extra-strength Maalox Plus Cherry Cream. Up to here with the fresh, minty taste of mint cream. And up to here with the zesty lemon taste of lemon Swiss cream. The strongest antacid tastes the best, too. Extra-strength Maalox Plus. Strong relief for all your Maalox moments.
Maalox, you're the best.
It's John Carlson on the phone from Los Angeles again.
Carlson? He's from Apple Computers ad agency. They want to do a commercial about us. Would we get to be in the commercial? No, because we can't do it.
Why not?
Over the past 15 months, we've doubled our productivity. We've cut development time by 1/3. That's what I mean. Why would we go on national TV and tell our competition exactly how we did it? It's a good point.
It's happening again. Right before your eyes. One day only. Yes, it's true. The Dynamite Channel 7 team has once again dug up the dinosaurs for another fun-filled celebration. It's Channel 7's Dino Day at the Lawrence Hall of Science Saturday. Now's your chance to mingle with the mega giants of yesteryear. So come on down. The exhibit lasts February 2nd through May 27th. See for yourself before they disappear.
Welcome to El Torito's sizzling fajitas fiesta. Our famous steak or chicken fajitas with your choice of a taco, an enchilada, taquitos, and more, all for just $7.95. Our sizzling fajitas combinations. When we're hot, we're hot. Get free nachos with any of El Torito's $7.95 fajita combos.
Your Ford dealers just received a special shipment of cars factory price to save you thousands. Hundreds of Mustangs have just arrived with air, stereo cassette, and more at no extra charge. A special allocation of loaded Tauruses, 1,000 less than before. A huge selection of Thunderbirds equipped with cassette stereo, speed control, and more at no extra charge. These aren't rebates, they're actual reductions in the sticker prices of each vehicle. Plus, you could save hundreds more with factory-to-dealer incentives. But hurry, this ends soon. See your Ford dealer today.
Cluster bombs, a deadly weapon designed for the U.S. by the U.S., has made its way from this country to the hands of the enemy. How could this happen? 2020, Friday.
Watch Good Morning America for continuing coverage of Operation Desert Storm.
With full reports from ABC News, join us here on Good Morning America.
Joining us now live from Amman, Jordan, is British journalist Bruce Chesman. Mr. Chesman was taken prisoner in Baghdad on January 17th after he was suspected of being an American pilot. He was interrogated in the same cell as another British reporter who was executed last year for collecting information on an Iraqi nuclear facility. Mr. Chesman, you're a journalist, so you're able to condense a lot of information into a relatively short period of time, which I'm afraid is all we have. Why were you arrested in the first place? I mean, how did they come to think that you might be an American pilot?
Well, I was found near the air security headquarters. So I was immediately taken by an Arab who pinned me from behind and said, American pilot, American pilot. And I said, no, I'm a British journalist. But they immediately took me and put me in a cell.
How did you come to be in that particular location? By then, obviously, the bombing had begun. This was January 17th, right?
Well, it all started. I was in the Rashid Hotel along with most of the correspondents when the bombing started. And I heard the bombing, and I got out of bed, and I went downstairs. And my first thought was I had to file my story. That's the reason I was there. And the telex machines were being used, and there was about 20 journalists hanging around there. And people were trying to get out of the hotel to the front, but no one was allowed to go. So I thought that maybe the Iraqis are not very thorough, so I could possibly go out the garden and then go to the American embassy where I had been filing before. And I thought there was a chance that I could file, and I was caught actually sneaking across the city while the bombing was underway, trying to get to the embassy to file my story.
Well, wasn't the embassy closed? I mean, the Sharjah and all the others had left, hadn't they?
It has, but it was open about 7 days before the war, and all the American correspondents were regularly going in there and filing their copy to their newspapers and outlets.
No, but I mean the American Sharjah and all the other diplomats had left before the war began.
Right, but the embassy itself was still open. In other words, you could actually get in and still use the telephone.
Ah, I see. Yeah. After you were arrested, then you were taken where? To a military detention center or a police detention center? Did you know?
Well, one of the things was it was almost like a sort of a Kafkaesque experience. I never really knew, but I did know that one man was military intelligence because one of the guards told me that you are spy, and I said no, and he said you must be spy because you wouldn't have been brought here, and he did say that that was a military intelligence building.
Tell us something about your interrogation.
Well, there was 2 or 3 interrogations, but the most brutal was the first one, which was done while I was blindfolded and handcuffed, and I was on the floor, kneeling in front of this man. And even now, I hear this voice, even last night when I was trying to sleep. I never actually saw his face. And for an hour, he interrogated me, a very cold voice. And every time I tried to raise my head, a guard behind me would sort of hit me around the neck.
And what was it they wanted to know from you?
Well, they wanted to know what I was doing in front of that building, and they were convinced that I was either a spy or a pilot, and they made no real effort to actually check my identity. As far as they were concerned, I think they were looking for an American spy or pilot at that time because war had just been broken out, and it could have been used as propaganda for them.
Now, did you have no identification with you at all?
I didn't have my passport, but I had a telex card from a newspaper in London, and I repeatedly told them Sfahafi, which is the Arabic for journalist, and all they really had to do was ring up the Ministry of Information, but that never happened. I don't think it ever happened all through the 4 nights I was in captivity.
Now, you were moved several times, and at one point they made you completely undress, right, and kneel down on a stone floor. What happened then?
Right, that was the next day from the military intelligence. What happened, I was taken into this room, I was blindfolded once again, I was handcuffed. They took the handcuffs off when they told me to strip, so I stripped, and then I tried to keep my sort of underwear on, but they insisted upon removing that, and I was pushed to the floor. It was a concrete floor, and then for about half an hour in the cold, I was sort of grilled again, and once again I was kicked and beaten whenever I tried to move, because I got cramped, so I tried to stand up, and I got kicked and pushed to the floor again.
How finally did you get out? I mean, what finally convinced them to release you?
I really don't know. That's almost, to me, as much of a mystery as where I was all through the period. All of a sudden, I was taken from another cell up to a place where I was originally held, suddenly given my clothes, which I didn't really understand whether they were going to release me or it was another interrogation, and I was suddenly dumped with some soldiers. And these soldiers didn't seem to know who I was, and one, who was quite friendly, said he would ring the Ministry of Information, and he did so. And an hour later, I was back in the Rashid Hotel, very relieved.
Well, we're all enormously glad that you've made it out safely. Are you heading back to London now, or are you going to stay in the region?
No, I'm getting out as soon as I can, thank you very much.
All right, well, have a good trip home, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
I'll be back with a program note after this. Where more than 500,000 U.S. troops are now in place. Standing by live in eastern Saudi Arabia, my colleague Faris Sawyer. Faris, can you bring us up to date on what's been happening today?
I certainly can, Ted. It's a mark of how far we have come in the past 2.5 weeks of this war that we can say things are relatively quiet here on this Saturday morning. In fact, the largest air assault in history is going on absolutely undiminished. A tremendous amount of armament is being dropped on Iraqi troops, and we are getting a lot of reports of movement across the Iraqi border by tanks, by armored personnel carriers, and by trucks. They are not coming across the border. They seem to be moving around inside. Now, they may be preparing for some sort of action. They may be simply trying to resupply those troops, but they are certainly clear targets for the American planes. And when you have this kind of confusion and this kind of tremendously fast-changing environment, you have the problem of friendly fire. You remember Tuesday night they are investigating a possible incident where those 11 Marines may have been hit by friendly fire when the Iraqis were being fought. Once again, there is an investigation underway of friendly fire on some Marines, possible friendly fire this morning. Some cluster bombs may have landed near them. No injuries at all this time, and they're saying even if it was friendly fire, there are no hard feelings at this point. And one other interesting story, Ted. 35 Iraqi sailors were picked up out in the Persian Gulf after their little patrol boats were knocked out by American fire. They were interrogated by a Kuwaiti. That interrogator claims that the 35 sailors say they were ordered by their superiors to take their vessels into Iranian waters and seek safe haven where they could stay for the conduct of the war, because if they were out there in the Gulf, they knew full well they were likely going to disappear. These sailors didn't make it.
Now, you may have misspoken, or I may have misunderstood. You spoke before about troops possibly coming across the Iraqi border. I assume you mean the Kuwaiti border into Saudi Arabia?
I absolutely did misspeak. What I'm trying to say is they are not moving across the Kuwaiti border into Saudi Arabia.
Again, yesterday there was some confusion, Forrest, about what kind of force was massing out there, and as our viewers may remember, Bob Zelnick reported last night, and I think he was closer to being accurate, but I'd like to get the last figures from you, that rather than being this huge force of 50 to 60,000 that we had heard about, there might be somewhere between 5 and 10 or maybe as much as 15,000 Iraqi troops along that border area. Have they become any clearer about that?
Well, you know that they will not talk in absolute numbers. They'll kind of push us in a certain direction. It appears that the large numbers we were hearing, a division or two, maybe as much as 60,000 troops massing along the border, absolutely not right. It's a much lower number, and it's not clear quite what they're doing at this point. There is no movement across the border. There is simply this moving around of vehicles. They think it may be resupplying, but you can believe the Americans are quite busy with them.
The big news back here, Forrest, was that the president said that the United States was not going to let Iraq determine the time and place of a ground assault if and when it was going to take place. What kind of resonance do you see or hear back there in Saudi Arabia in terms of preparedness or sort of laying back for a while and allowing the Air Force to do the job, the Air Force and Navy planes?
Well, General Boomer, who's leading the Marines here, said exactly the same thing. We're not going to get drawn into this. If the Iraqis would like to come across the border and have at us, they're welcome to it, because that's our game, is what you're hearing from the Marines and from the Army troops that are up there. They are not going to go in there and begin a ground assault in any way. They feel that the air assault, which could go on for a good long time now, is weakening them. The kinds of movement that they are seeing inside Kuwait, they believe is an indication of precisely that. So there's no reason for them to change their game plan at this point. It is proceeding, they seem to believe, at the way they'd like.
All right, Forrest, if you would stand by and just listen to this next interview, because I'm going to be joined now by Brent Sadler. He has been, as you know, the Middle East correspondent for ITN, a British television organization, for the past 4 years. He re-entered Baghdad during the past few days, and he joins us now live from there. Brent, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can, Ted. It's just about daybreak here. It's a blue sky, very bright, and thankfully very quiet so far.
Now, when you say very quiet, any action in the air at all? Apparently, just before you got there, there's been all kinds of activity, and indeed, I think we saw a piece of video earlier in the day that may have been shot by your cameraman of a U.S. cruise missile, a phenomenal sight.
Yes, indeed, it was phenomenal.
Brent, can you still hear me all right? Or have we just lost our line to Baghdad? We have to point out that obviously Brent Sadler, as is the case with all other foreign correspondents in Iraq, is probably in the presence of an Iraqi censor. I don't want to jump to any conclusions. I don't know if we just lost the telephone line or if someone in Baghdad cut the telephone line. But let's go back to Forrest Sawyer, who's still standing by in Saudi Arabia. And it brings me, in fact, to a question I was going to ask you before. For almost the entirety of this war, the 2.5 weeks that it's been going on, we have heard about thousands of sorties every day. And, of course, most of those were directed against command and control installations and Scud sites and industrial positions in Iraq. Are those flights still going on?
I'm sorry, the last part, Ted?
I say, are those, is that air activity against Iraq itself still in place, or is everything now being directed against Iraqi forces in Kuwait and along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border?
I believe they are still moving north into Kuwait. They are still striking targets up there. They have begun to shift into another phase, however, and they have made that very clear. They have struck a lot of the command and control centers that they want. There is no activity at the airports. 0 Iraqi planes are lifting off. They have air supremacy, so they feel that they can start shifting the emphasis now. So they can start cutting logistics lines. They can start hitting the troops a little harder, going at those hardened bunkers with smart bombs so they can take out tanks. This is the direction in which they're moving, but it's a kind of gradual shift. You're not going to see a kind of on-off light going here.
Forrest Sawyer, thank you very much. We'll be back with more.
Monitoring the war and the world 24 hours a day. Updates on the hour. Special reports as events warrant. Complete coverage on every broadcast. The people of ABC News, asking questions, getting answers, in touch more than ever. And weeknights, watch ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Just a few minutes ago, if you were watching, I was talking with Brent Sadler, the Middle East correspondent for the British television outfit ITN, and we were cut off. I'm happy to report that was technical and not because of a censor, and we have reestablished contact with Mr. Sadler. Brent, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can, Ted. I was just going into some graphic detail of this Tomahawk cruise missile attack that I witnessed yesterday. It was a phenomenal sight watching these cruisers coming, map reading their way down one of the 6-lane highways westwards into Baghdad and beyond, where their pre-programmed targets were heading. But certainly 2 of those missiles were brought down by anti-aircraft fire from Iraqi gunners by the roadside. It was strange that the Allied forces should send 6 of these missiles, one after the other, chasing each other down the road, because it gave the Iraqis some time to zero in on them. The missiles crashed down onto a residential area of Baghdad, and there were a number of civilian casualties that I saw there.
When you talk about these missiles map reading their way down the road, I'm sure that by now so many of our viewers have become savvy with what it is that a cruise missile does, but just explain it. What do you mean, map reading its way?
Well, the cruise missile is programmed to follow the contours and key ground positions on its path to wherever it is going. They come at, I guess about 3 or 4 stories high. That's 100 feet above that. They're like a thinking torpedo, if you like, that is following a map in its computer brain. And obviously a 6-lane highway is a very accurate way of finding your way across Iraq. So it uses that to guide itself in to the target it has been told to destroy. That's how they work.
But you're telling me that you personally witnessed at least a couple of those being shot down by anti-aircraft fire?
Yes, indeed. The anti-aircraft fire was pretty intense around where I was standing, and certainly there were a couple of explosions not too far from where we were. And within 40 minutes of that first cruise attack, I went over to a civilian area, and there was clearly the aftermath of an explosion which had happened shortly before. There was a house that had been destroyed. There were civilians inside. They were covered in dust and rubble. I clambered over the brickwork. I scrambled inside. I spoke to these people. But as I must stress, that these cruisers were brought down by Iraqi fire rather than finding that location themselves. They were clearly going somewhere else.
All right, Brent Sadler, thank you very much. As you may know, we have another crisis of sorts going on here out at Los Angeles Airport. There has been an air crash, and I want to go...
And we welcome you to Night Focus. This is our Friday night simulcast, where we take the major story of the week and look at it, and that's exactly what we're going to do tonight. I'm Michael Krasny. With me tonight from Channel 7, Lisa Stark, filling in for Richard Brown.
Nice to see you, Michael. Tonight we are going to talk about the war in the Gulf. We are going to talk about a possible ground war. Before we get to that, though, we want to mention that if we do have any new information on the plane crash in Los Angeles, we will be bringing you that during this half hour. But the main topic of discussion, the ground war. The first skirmishes started this week. Will there be a larger ground war? Is it inevitable? And what will be the consequences of that? How will the U.S. fare?
And of course, as always, you are invited to join in this program. This is a live interactive program. Your questions and comments are welcome, and we have a phone line available to you. That number, 1-800-621-7777.
But first, we have heard so much about America's high-tech military might. We have seen a lot of the pictures of the smart bombs and what has gone on thus far in the war. We want to bring you up to date, though, on the first skirmishes on the ground.
Stand by! Fire!
10:30 p.m. Tuesday, Iraqi forces initiated ground warfare in Saudi Arabia, drawing Allied troops into battle. Battle they'd hoped would wait until air assaults had made their mark on the enemy. After 2 days of intense fighting, Allies recaptured the invaded city. The attack, considered to be a test by Iraq to gauge Allied strength, brought us our first glimpse of desert ground war. For months, we've heard of Iraq's sophisticated ground capabilities, from complex underground facilities of bunkers and roads to tanks designed for desert combat. Sheer numbers, over 500,000 Iraqi ground troops, are cause enough for concern.
A Soviet general once said, quantity has a quality all its own. And when you're talking about an Iraqi force that has 4 times as many tanks as we do, what that means in practical terms to you, tank commander, is that you have to kill 4 of his tanks for every one you lose just to stay even. And the object is not to stay even.
Since the war began, Allied air forces have focused efforts on trying to weaken enemy ground strength. Thousands of sorties later, the air attack appears to be having an impact. At Wednesday's Pentagon briefing, General Schwarzkopf detailed the success of coalition air assaults.
Given this entire presentation tonight about the effectiveness of the coalition air forces, is there a chance that there won't need to be a ground war?
There's always a chance of that. But certainly, you know, as a military planner, you always plan for the worst case rather than the best.
With Allied dominance in the skies, a ground campaign may become the only option for Saddam Hussein. If so, the coalition will have to respond, battling Iraq's complex and menacing forward defenses, along with the sand itself.
We have a poll that we want you to participate in tonight. Our People poll question tonight: how much longer will the Gulf War last? Less than a month, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, or more than 6 months? You can register your vote by calling area code 415-478-VOTE. And we'll have results of that at the end of Night Focus.
Let me tell you who we have with us tonight on Night Focus. First of all, I want to introduce you to Kenneth Waltz, who was on with me on the radio earlier this week and made such an impression that we had to invite him here to be with us on Night Focus. He's a UC Berkeley political science professor and a military strategist, and you're looking, I guess, at Jack Gordon right in the camera there, who is a retired lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Army, and he is an armor specialist, and there's Professor Waltz. Let me begin, actually, with you, if I may, Ken. The incursion into Khafji suggests something pretty much antithetical to the position you've taken. It suggests that maybe the Iraqis may be moving on Saudi Arabia, maybe we're going to have a ground war sooner than we think, and quite possibly that's where the action really might get started. Now, when you were on with me earlier this week, you didn't seem to look at things that way. You thought we're starving them out, and we don't even necessarily have to have a ground war because of the aerial assault.
I think that some people call it a probe. I call it a last desperate, or nearly last desperate gesture, made not for military reasons, but for political reasons. Saddam was not able to protect his country in any significant degree from a devastating air attack. He has not done anything on the ground except this feeble foray on an empty city in which he killed almost no people. He lost much more by attacking than we did from the attack. I mean, he has to do something. He knew from the beginning that he would lose this war militarily. His only chance is to establish something politically so that he can say, once he's been beaten, and I'll vote in less than a month, that he stood up to Western imperialism.
All right, let me just turn it to Jack Gordon. Is this just political and not going anywhere in your judgment?
Well, first, it's speculative. We don't know. The last time the United States Army was in any parallel position, you'd have to look at the Bataan Peninsula in 1941. And what you run into is you are isolated, you're outnumbered, you can watch attrition eroding your forces, both in terms of materiel and in terms of personnel. And
eroding American forces, you're talking about.
Well, it would apply either case, but that's the case I'm citing. And you can watch them wasting away. So what do? Do you attempt to seize the initiative and use what you've got while you still have it and hope to make some impression? Or do you just sit there and hopefully conserve forces and wait till they come to you for the, quote, decisive battle? Or as Saddam put it, the mother of all battles. Or, as Ken indicated, do you go for a political attack, which against coalitions particularly might be an attractive move. Coalitions historically have tended to collapse when the pressure is on them. So he may have hoped that perhaps he could crack the Arab forces, the Saudis and the Omaris, I think were doing most of the fighting, and produce then some political breakage in will.
He certainly can't hope to crack the coalition by attacking a little town in Saudi Arabia.
But how insignificant was this? I mean, they managed to hold the town for 48 hours. And there were losses on the Saudis lost quite a few people. The Americans lost 11 Marines, although, again, we're not sure how that happened yet. But, I mean, doesn't this show, in fact, that the Iraqis have quite a bit of fight in them and that they're formidable?
Hellacious was the word, in fact.
Right, that was the word.
They did show a hell of a lot of fight, didn't they?
You have to, again, it's tough to tell if this was a desperate move or it may have been simply a morale attack. You sit there and get pounded and you want to come out and do something about it.
I don't
hard to tell what he was thinking of. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because when the ideal situation in mechanized war, when you have air supremacy, is let's get them in the open and have them moving, because then they're readily identifiable.
Forgive me, Jack, and forgive me, Ken. We have to go to a break. We'll come back and talk some more about the possibility of a ground war here on Night Focus. Stay with us.
It will only begin, if necessary, and when we decide that the time is right. We will conduct this conflict on our terms, on our timetable, not on Saddam Hussein's timetable.
Campbell's Tomato Soup, with endless mix-in possibilities, presents the sweepstakes with endless travel possibilities. Campbell's Tomato Soup will fly you and the guests to your choice of nearly 170 cities in the continental U.S. on U.S. Air, America's most frequent flyer. See the Campbell's Soup display at your participating grocer or send a postcard to Campbell's Tomato Soup. The possibilities are endless. Sweepstakes, care of this station. Box 4353, Hamden, Connecticut 06514.
From KGO-TV and Campbell's.
It's a wall-to-wall sellout at Auto West Toyota.
If you told me yesterday I could buy this car at this price...
The deal is not done till you deal with us.
I don't know how they do it, but I'm sure glad they do.
No one can save you bigger bucks. Two-wheel drive trucks, $49 down or $99 a month. Save $5,000 on a Toyota. 4x4s, $49 down or $179 a month. Get to Fremont Boulevard in Fremont now. Auto West Toyota, the Toyota warehouse. It's the time to buy.
For one day only this Sunday, Collectors Art returns to the Bay Area to sell out over 3,000 beautiful oil paintings at $39 or less. $39! Incredible! In addition to these paintings, hundreds of our gallery quality oils like you see here at unbelievably low prices. Don't miss Collectors Art this Sunday only, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. In Santa Clara at the Santa Clara Marriott. In Oakland at the Oakland Airport Clarion, formerly the Hyatt. In Concord at the Concord Sheraton. In San Mateo at the San Mateo Dusty Hotel. In Roddard Park at the Red Lion Hotel, Sonoma County. And in Union City at the Union City Holiday Inn.
Back with you live on Night Focus, and once again to let you know who we're talking with us in studios, Kenneth Waltz, UC Berkeley political science professor and military strategist, and Jack Gordon, retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army. Jack, let me turn to you and ask you just a quick question about this whole notion of friendly fire that we keep hearing about. Would you have, at this point, perhaps we're really just talking about an educated guess, but would you be able to hazard a guess in terms of whether or not those Marines died because of friendly fire?
I would rather not. It is certainly possible. And one of my idols as a general, a fellow by the name of Art West, described an armored battlefield as a scrambled egg, in which you're the egg. And it just, you button up in an armored vehicle under combat conditions. There's dust, there's smoke, there's confusion, your vision's restricted. You have fractions of a second to make life or death decisions. Is that an enemy vehicle? Is it a friendly vehicle? These things happen.
You say
there's no question.
It's possible. Is it probable in a ground, if we get into a big ground war, that we're going to see quite a few casualties from friendly fire, given what happens and all the sand and other things that are going on there?
Boy, I would have to say quite a few. We'll hang a number on that. Your friendly fire casualties with reasonable training and good combat discipline, you're probably talking on the order of less than 5% of the total casualties. So any casualties are too many.
Well, we keep hearing about the Iraqi soldiers is they know how to fight in the desert, they know how to endure hardships, they know how to I mean, they've been in battle through the Iran-Iraq war, and as a consequence of that, we can't, I heard Vladimir Sakharov, the former KGB agent, just say on a satellite report, we can't bomb them into submission, we're going to have to fight their game and do the groundwork. Ken, you do not agree?
I do not agree. Secretary of Defense Cheney said in the last week or so, when asked what our strategy is, that we're going to cut their army in Kuwait and southern Iraq off and kill it. Well, if we cut it off, we don't need to kill it. We can let them wither away. They don't have food. They don't have enough food, and they have very little water. The troops that we capture are getting lousier and lousier, and I mean that literally. I mean, they're lice-ridden because they don't have enough water to drink. They certainly don't have enough water to bathe.
So you're saying we can
every,
count on that?
Every day that goes by, they are getting weaker and weaker. Can you imagine keeping troops on alert 24 hours a day with planes buzzing over them all the time? I mean, their morale has to be going down. Every day that goes by, they sink.
They're
They
sinking.
sink.
All
They
right, we
sink.
want to get a caller in because some other people have questions too. We have Dave on the line from Danville. Dave? Hello, Dave?
One question I do have is why don't we go ahead, in lieu of the political climate, is go ahead and use the neutron bomb on the Republican Guard and just finish it right now?
Take care of it today.
Yeah.
What about that?
Well, I happen to know Sam Cohen, and I like him very much. And
He was on with my colleague Ryan Owens
He's
just last
known as
week.
the father of the enhanced
Character he
radiation
is, yeah.
bomb. Well, of course we could do that. But why? I mean, we are going to be the short-term winners. We're going to win this thing militarily and win it easily. Right?
Well, what about...
But if the more Iraqis we kill, the more we tear that country up, the more we ensure that we will be the long-run losers. Iran will win. Iran will become the dominant power
Hell wants
in
to
that
let
part
that
of the
neutron
Middle East.
genie out of the
Right.
bottle.
Do you agree?
I'm with Mike on that one. We have been trying to cram the nuclear genie back into the bottle ever since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we have never accepted the no first use as a government principle. We've reserved the right to use it if we need it, but I think it would be a political, psychological, strategical disaster for us to use it on a third world country. And we had similar opportunities in Vietnam.
Excuse me, Jack. We want to get another caller on here. Doug from San Francisco. Join us on Night Focus.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
This is Douglas Knight, the world's greatest artist, just calling up to get a little more famous. That's Douglas Knight. Thank you.
That was
That's
it?
a modest man who's self-promoting himself here on
That's
Night Focus.
right. Well-
That's a first, and man is shameless.
Right, well, let me move on. Ken here says he doesn't think a ground war is inevitable. What do you think? Do you think we are going to have to fight them, and are we going to see more skirmishes like the kind we saw this week?
I think we're going to have to fight him on the ground. It's a difficult case to argue because I hope he's right. You know, I hope they, having been in the ground end, and Vietnam was certainly not a mechanized war on their side, which made life a lot easier on ours. But I don't see, with a resolute enemy, with a reasonable discipline, with the cohesive state which he has demonstrated so far, there has been no case in history except for one small island in halfway between North Africa and Sicily where air power alone won a war. I hope he's right. Certainly, we can cause him a great deal of grief. But the isolation of the battlefield has never been, the Air Force has never been able to deliver interdiction perfectly. It's like squeezing a hose. You squeeze the hose and they go hungry. Then they start pouring more things into it with more primitive methods of supply. And at the other end comes out enough to keep them going.
You got to go in and cut off the hose, huh?
Cut it off and kill it. Yeah, we have another caller?
No, I think we're going to take a break.
Oh, we are going to take a break. Excuse me then, Ken. We'll do that, then we'll come back for more. Stay with us. This is Night Focus on KGO TV and KGO Radio.
The cohesive state of the tyranny.
Lost our lease. The bedroom has lost our lease on our Santa Clara showroom. And we must liquidate everything immediately. Up to 70% off store-wide. Save up to 70% on water beds, bedroom furniture, accessories. Everything must go wall to wall. Water beds and bedroom furniture at cost and below cost. Up to 70% off with no payments for 6 months. The bedroom has lost our lease in Santa Clara. Save now at all bedroom locations. In Santa Clara, El Camino Real, 2 blocks north of San Thomas Expressway. Also in Redwood City, San Lorenzo, Dublin, and Pleasant Hill.
Introducing new EPT.
That's you.
The most trusted name in home pregnancy test is now even easier. A simple, accurate stick test tells in just minutes whether you're going to have a baby or not.
A baby?
New EPT, a faster, easier way to get the big news.
Cool.
She was driving me crazy, saying, we really have to watch what we eat, which means we won't eat anything that tastes good. So she brings up the subject of reduced fat cheese, which may look and smell like cheese, but sure doesn't taste like cheese. Then she tells me I am eating reduced fat cheese, and it's low in cholesterol. So I pause, and I taste, and it's good. And I say, okay, so we'll watch what we eat.
Kraft Life Naturals. Reduced fat cheese that actually tastes like cheese.
Welcome back to Night Focus on Channel 7 and KGO Radio. We're talking about the war in the Persian Gulf and the possible ground war. If there is a ground war, we've heard a lot about, you say the U.S. will win it. The U.S. will win it easily, perhaps. Will they? Is it going to be a tough fight? The Iraqis have had 5 months to dig in. They supposedly are very good at fighting this type of war. What are U.S. forces up against?
I think we lose sight of the fact that we're fighting a country that has a population of fewer than 19 million people. Right? Their gross national product is about 1/8 of our defense budget.
But they have half
yearly.
a million troops.
They have 500,000 troops, about 550,000 in the south and about 150,000 opposite Turkey. That's a total of 700,000 subtracted from a small labor force. The industry and agriculture are at a standstill.
Oh, yeah.
How can they supply these troops when we are bombing their supply lines? I mean, they're obviously running out of food. They're obviously running out of water. They're obviously running out of ammunition because we blow up their ammunition dumps. Right?
They aren't running out of gumption, though, apparently.
Oh, no, but we don't know if that's gumption or not.
Historically speaking,
They fight out of fear.
The rule of thumb has always been that you can mobilize about 10% of your population. So if we credit them with 17 million population, that's 1.7 million soldiers. That's a lot of folks.
And where does a group,
That's a
for
lot of
example,
troops.
Without any food, without any water.
Notwithstanding what you've said, Ken, the Center for Defense Information, for example, in Washington, which is a very prestigious think tank, came out with the notion that if there was a tank war in Iraq or Kuwait, you would have about 45,000 casualties and fighting going on for 3 months.
That's why General Schwarzkopf, who I greatly admire, says, wait, sit. When you don't have to fight, when they are getting weaker day by day, as obviously they are, well, give them a week, give them 2 weeks, give them a month. I think President Bush understands that now, given what he said today. We are controlling the timetable and
the terms. That's what he said.
We have another caller, Loretta in San Francisco. Loretta, what's your question?
My question is, do we have the capacity in any of our bombs to reach into his bunkers and destroy them? And if so, why don't we?
I defer to Jack.
The answer is yes, maybe, and no, in that order. We can crack almost any...
You used to work for the Pentagon?
We can crack almost any fortification we can find with sufficient sorties and sufficient missiles. Finding it is quite a difficult problem. And finding a given bunker is possible, but then how do you know he's there? Targeting a single individual is an incredibly difficult thing unless you've got a spy standing by his shoulder with a radio. And that just doesn't happen.
Which brings up another interesting question, which is, and I want to get to another caller here quickly, but the idea that the Iraqis are going to use the Kuwaitis as shields, or our own POWs as shields. And then if we're in a land war and they're using shields, Kuwaiti soldiers, or for that matter, American POWs, what do we do?
You keep on going.
Let me get a caller in.
Don from San Francisco. Don?
Hi. My question is, do we really want this war to end now with him regrouping, knowing probably with 80% of his war machine left, knowing our strengths, our weaknesses, knowing his miscalculations, only to come back 3 or 4 a month or a year or two down the road? Or do we want this war to continue until we've totally disarmed him and beat him, to the pulp? Totally wiped him out. Is that to our benefit, or is it to our benefit for him to withdraw now, regroup with his men, knowing where he made his mistakes to come back later? What do we really want?
That's a key question.
Very important question. Quick responses if we can.
Very quickly, yes, we want the war to end now. Let me repeat, it's a country of 19 million people. It's not a threat to the world, despite all of the rhetoric we hear. The damage that we've done to Iraq so far will take at least 10 years to rebuild, militarily and industrially and agriculturally.
I would tend to agree. Our stated objective is the liberation of Kuwait. We don't have an interest in destroying Iraq as a viable state because I think Ken pointed out earlier the winner in that case would be Iran, and we don't want a single power dominant in that region. On the other hand, we certainly have no interest in the preservation of the specific leadership of Saddam Hussein. So the ideal ending would probably for us would be a change of government in Iraq without a change in the state of Iraq.
Do you think that's our objective, real quickly, our unstated objective?
Unstated objectives, your opinion is as good as anybody else's. Our stated objective is the liberation of Kuwait.
And we'll leave it at that, I guess. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back. Stay with us.
It knocked me to the deck. I mean, it's a weird kind of pain. It's more psychological, really, than anything, because you're thinking, oh, my God, I just got nailed.
Listerine kills germs. It hits plaque above the gum line. Listerine battles the gum disease, gingivitis, in big fight tonight. It's a right. And another right. Listerine really rocked him. It's over. The winner. Listerine antiseptic. It says what it does. It does what it says.
No matter where you live in this region,
go to the Source.
For the first time ever, get 1991 Fords at fleet prices at the Source.
Sunnyvale Ford.
Choose from 300 1991 Ford cars and trucks.
At fleet prices and pay nothing till May. $49 delivery.
Make no payment.
Till May.
1991.
But you must go now. This sale ends Monday, February 18th. Don't be left in the dark.
Go to the Source.
Sunnyvale Ford. El Camino Real between Fair Oaks and Wolf.
If you wait, you will pay more.
From Hollywood Pictures, he was set up for a crime he didn't commit. Now, everyone wants him dead. Run, rated R.
Now playing at theaters near you.
Back with you on Night Focus, and we've just got a little bit of time left. Of course, we'll give you the people poll in just a moment. Let me turn to you gentlemen, though, and ask the difficulty of dislodging these troops at this point, and the sense of, for example, Mubarak said, you know, Ramadan's coming down the line. They don't want to fight past February. How is this going to be done without a land war? And let me just throw that to you, if I can, Lieutenant.
I think what we'd have to do first is we should not go straight at them. MacArthur said that frontal assaults are the refuge of mediocre commanders. And I have great confidence that we don't have mediocre commanders there. I would look for essentially a holding attack in the south and a maneuver battle aimed first at the Republican Guard, whatever's left of it, to destroy his reserves and isolate the troops in Kuwait. Literally a movement to the west first and then north around them. And then hopefully it would be a question of attacking them from reverse or just mopping them up.
Okay.
Why attack? Right? They are going to wither on the vine. Right? I hope that General Schwarzkopf and I are not the only ones who understand that. Right?
Okay, we hope you are right, too, and I'm sure the troops there hope you're right as well. We want to give the people poll results very quickly. Very interesting results tonight. 12% of those who called in think it will be a short war, less than a month. 11% say a little longer. 13% 3 to 6 months. 64% of those who called in now think the war is going to last more than 6 months. So apparently the public is starting to believe anyway that the war is going to take a little bit longer than perhaps they first thought.
Yeah. I hope that our England gentleman here from Berkeley is more on the correct track on that, but we will find out. We'll also find out more about what you think because we'll be on the radio with you. So stay with us on 810. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you both. We'll be back with you next week on Nightfall.
Birds may be down, but not out. For the first time since Thursday, the missiles are flying again. Attacks have been launched overnight aimed at both Israel and Saudi Arabia.